Good evening. I've just been reminded last time I came up on this stage for Music Mondays I managed to spill a drink, so being very careful as I sit down. Good evening, welcome everyone to Music Industry Mondays, welcome to the Music Box, welcome to LCCM. We gather here every Monday evening to share knowledge and talent. Knowledge of how the industry works from people inside the industry who have that knowledge, who are willing to share it with you, and talent, because we have many talented people in this room who will be gracing the stage later in the open mic, and we're all looking forward to seeing the talent that's on display. I believe we have some guests in the house this evening from Windsor Forest College in Egham, so welcome to you guys. Hope you've enjoyed your tour of the facilities, and I believe a couple of you have put your names down to perform at the open mic, which is brave, and we're really looking forward to seeing you perform. And I think there's other regulars that come here for Music Industry Mondays, some LCCM students, so it should be a good night. Yeah, good luck in the open mic. So tonight's guest from Music Industry Mondays, sharing his knowledge of the industry and his long-time campaigning for British black music. Please give a warm welcome to Kwaku. So welcome, Kwaku. You are chair of the British Black Music Congress. What does that mean?
Well, what happened was that I started the website britishblackmusic.com because I used to be part of something called Black Music Association. Then because then people thought because it was Black Music Association was just Africans. By the way, I don't do black, I do Africans. So we changed the name slightly to Black Music Industry Association, so that it was any person interested in black music, irrespective of their heritage or ethnicity. Unfortunately, for a lot of these organizations, they depend on funding, public funding, and once that goes, that was it. So this organization, they fold because the funding was pooled. So that was the 10, and I see a lot of young people, so I can say that was the 10 when the internet was coming. You know, there was a time when there was no internet?
I remember those days.
Right, yeah. So I thought, okay, we can migrate some of the stuff, and now it's more into the music business, doing the seminars and stuff. So I thought we can migrate some of that online. So I started the britishblackmusic.com and put information on, and then I realized that as much as we're doing things online, you need eyeball to eyeball, so a physical space. So we started Black Music Congress. So I used to teach at City University, so we got the space there to do monthly meetings, and so that was what the Congress was about. We have one topic and debate, you have panelists come and network and that kind of stuff.
So the Congress is all about doing things like this, coming together.
Indeed.
Encouraging knowledge of the history and the artistry of British black music.
And the networking, because no matter how good you are, if you've not got networks, it's often difficult to move. So it's about networking, yes.
Yeah. So our paths crossed a few times. I think first came across you when you were a journalist reviewing records and albums for Billboard magazine, for DJ magazine, for Touch magazine. I think in my days at Ministry of Sound, you reviewed some of the records we released, and then you were one of the first journalists to support the artist I was managing 15 years ago, Nate James, who has graced the chair you're in, and we did an interview.
Yes, I saw the video, I love it.
Yeah, so one of our previous guests, and yeah, so I've got you to thank for my early artist management career. You supported one of my key artists, and also, I think you're also partly responsible for my career in education, because it was through the British Black Music Congress. I think you invited me to do what was probably my first seminar speaking to an audience about the industry. So again, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Kwaku's effectively been my mentor.
Thank you.
So I mean, that illustrates the power of education. By sharing knowledge, by coming together, you never know what you can start.
Indeed.
You're lighting little fires and helping people's careers progress. As you say, organizations like yours are, very reliant on funding. So how?
No, not ours. Our organization was determined. We started with one. It was called the Millennium Fund. I think it must have been about 1,000 for the website, but No, the reason why we're still around is that we haven't been dependent on funding.
Okay, okay. But have you earned yourself an MBE, a knighthood? Where's the recognition?
It hasn't come, and we'll see.
We'll see.
Yes.
We'll have to have a word with our contacts at UK Music, see if they can have a word with our people in government.
Cool.
What was it that first got you into supporting the scene? Obviously, you know, was there a particular act, a career of your own? What was it that got you into, you know, sharing the history of British black music?
I'm not quite sure, but I think I started around the journalism in the 90s when there was a lot of, remember, there was something called desktop publishing. So people did not have to rely on the big publishers. You could buy a small Mac, and the software came, and you could start doing magazines. So I started writing for a whole lot of magazines, and I don't know, I sort of gravitated, I don't think it was instinctive, I just sort of graduated towards British music. Obviously, I'm into black music, so the heroes would be the Americans. If you're into reggae, it would be the Jamaicans. But for some reason, I thought I wanted to focus on the British, and it became like, okay, I'm just doing British, and that's the trajectory that I went on.
Yeah, so interesting. What would you say with the key differences in terms of the American sound and the British sound? We've had, obviously, we talked about Nate James. We also had The Influence come and do a Music History Mondays recently. There have been many successful acts who've had a really definitive British sound to their success, and then perhaps a broader global scene where black music's obviously huge and with an American slant. So what do you think the Brits do that's unique that can differentiate it?
Okay, I'll take it in two ways. I was just reading about Junior Giscombe. He's been given an award by a newspaper called the Weekly Gleaner. And his big hit was Mama, Mama Used to Say. And one of the first African-British artists to cross over into the US charts. I think particularly artists that came in the 70s and the 80s, remember, we only had one national radio station, which was Radio 1. So I think the British black music at that time was very pop, because that's what we had. Pirates came, I think, the late 80s into the 90s, where you had soul pirates. So we listened to pop music that everybody listened to, from John O'Groats to whatever. And I think that influenced the style. Look at groups like Lynx, Junior Giscombe, very, very poppy. So we used to have a program called Top of the Pops. If they had a major label or a big indie, they could fit it into Top of the Pops. But some people thought it wasn't authentic, and I have an issue with this word authentic and what it means, because we were looking to the American sound, and our sound was slightly, even the way it was mixed, more for radio than punchy was coming from America. So I think that's a good thing. But fun enough, today, I don't know, I was looking for something, and I saw a badge, and it said, I am best. I forgot what best means. I think best was like British entertainment, whatever. But I am stood for as international something African-American music. The point was that, and this was 1995. From the mid-90s, this organization used to come to Britain. Remember, there were a few Africans in key positions in the music business then. So they would come and see the MPs, see the heads of the big companies. And there was a push to get Africans into key positions in the record business. But around the same time, what occurred to me was that the Americans were copying something that we're doing. And I think that came from the Jamaican influence of heavy bass, because I don't think they had it then. Mm-hmm. Teddy Riley and all these people started picking up. So I'm talking about mid-90s, picking up on, because we had something called two-step soul, which was a different style of soul to the American soul. Mm-hmm. It was a different genre, and that had a slight reggae. I don't know if people into reggae, there's something called the one drop. I don't know how to explain you. I don't know. You don't know it. And that influenced our soul, and the Americans started picking up on that. Not a lot has been written about it, but so that's how I'm going to answer your question.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Jamaican sound systems, and then also in the British scene, there's not such an emphasis on, in terms of executives, you're saying, it'd be good to get more African people from African heritage into positions of power within record companies. But actually, someone like Chris Blackwell, Island Records, white guy, was really instrumental in bringing Jamaican infused black music into the UK scene. My experience as a white executive managing people of color is in America, it's harder to sort of, there's almost a degree of segregation still, where to be taken seriously as a manager, you almost have to represent the people of your color, which I found hard, obviously.
No, explain that. I'm a bit confused.
Yeah, so it seemed to me that I couldn't represent a black artist in America as a white guy.
Well, rather, except things have changed, because when I used to write for Billboard, this seems to occur. Managers, the African-American managers were saying as soon as their artists are successful, they move to European managers.
Really?
So there was an issue there. So I'm talking about the 90s into the early 2000s. A lot of the artists and also lawyers, they move from African-American lawyers to European lawyers because they think they can open doors or they can speak to executives. Remember, again, I'm talking about Britain, but even in America, although there's some Africans in key positions, a lot of the run-of-the-mill executives were European. So they thought that having a European manager or a European lawyer would open doors. So maybe things have changed, but when I used to write for Billboard, this used to occur, and they were kicking against it. Mm-hmm. So a lot of artists, African-American artists, probably were, what should I say, not confident, and they thought having a European manager was the way to go. So what if things have changed? I don't know.
Yeah, no, but that's interesting, and it also makes me think about your comment about the radio-friendly music in the UK. Do you think in both America and Britain, black artists have had to widen their sound or try to appeal to white audiences to get on the radio historically? And has that changed more recently, do you think?
Yeah, good question. I think historically it did, because if you're looking for the numbers, you do you remember those guys who used to do something to their head, Nat King Cole, and everything to be as European as whatever. So you did the sound that you thought mainstream, and mainstream meant essentially the European majority. I think things changed with gangster rap, for example. That's hardcore, unashamedly. So you're either into it or you're not into it. And funny enough, it started selling, so it became self-perpetuating, that people became even more hardcore and the extremeness to sell. So, yeah, to answer your question, but right now, I think, let me come to Britain. People used to say we used to copy the Americans, and remember, those that have got a knowledge of hip-hop in Britain, we used to have people who used to have the American twang. Mm-hmm. And they came from East London, but because what we had was the American accent, so we imitated them. Then we had people like London Posse coming, and things started changing. Now, I think British artists can be who they want to be. They can use their language, because it also sells. So I think when things sell, people feel comfortable in it. Let me just digress. I interviewed a guy called Luciano, a reggae artist. And he's supposed to be known as a messenger because he's a very conscious artist, right? And so I'm talking about the 90s when there was a genre of reggae that was called slackness. Very negative, lewd language and whatever. And even though Luciano is known as a messenger, the most conscious artist, he said when he started, he was doing slackness because that was what he saw. So I think when people see that something can sell, sometimes they go into whether they're comfortable with it, because sometimes people are just looking at this. But I'm saying right now, people can use their own language, their own environment, and it sells. So I think it's great. It's great.
Yeah, and you talked about authenticity earlier. If they do take on an accent or a style from overseas, whether it's America or Jamaica, do you think that they can still be authentic with that? Or
you see, I think the word authentic is subjective. You don't know a man and where they, until you've worked in a man's shoe, you don't know where they're coming from. All we see from the outside, and we are making assumptions. So if my man wants to rap in the American accent and it sounds good, good for him. If my man wants to rap in the Cockney accent and it sounds good, good for him. I think horses for courses. We shouldn't be judgmental because you don't know people's lives.
Your Congress meetings, your educational seminars, what do you think the most important historical development in British black music is that maybe people don't know or you want to share more widely?
Wow. For someone who is really spending his time doing a lot of history, I do a lot of what I call global African or British African history, trying to look at the British history. I don't know. I don't know what I can say. All I know is that the Congress, they give people links in terms of contacts. All I know is that, actually, I can say on here that I think probably the what I represent, which is BBM, BMC, BritishBlackMusic.com, Black Music Congress, probably we've come to the end of our sell-by date because I'm seeing the industry has changed so much. Let me just tell you, as I was coming, I thought, let me just check how things have changed. So I'll talk about your artist, Nate James, and you may have a better handle on the figures, and Omar. So Omar came before Nate James. Omar is one of our top R&B soul artists, and he was on an independent label, independent distributed. I think it was distributed by Spartan, which was a small distributor in Wembley. And they managed to get an album into the British charts, I think number 54. That was fantastic, because I always look at the mainstream, so I look at the Music Week charts or the Billboard charts, and it was very rare for an independent small label to get into the charts. Subsequently, he was signed by a major phonogram, which is now owned by Universal, and I think he got into the top 20. Your artist, his album came out, and I think, was it 96 or something?
2005.
Yeah, no. It reached number 96 or something. The outer reaches of the top 100. But that was a great album. It was very, very difficult it was an independent company. It was very, very difficult, no matter how good the music was, to get into the charts. If you're not being sold by Virgin, unfortunately, it's not a retailer anymore, and you're not being played by Radio 1, it was very, very difficult. So, and even the single as well, Set the Tone, fantastic record. But where did it get to?
Top 75?
Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is that black music, as good as it was, wasn't making headway in the industry the way it was set up. But let me tell you something, by the way. Anthony is saying he got to, let's say, number 75, for example. But the fact that a record gets to number 75 in those days, it was possible that that record could have probably sold more than the record that's number 50. Do you know why? Because the charts were compiled by what we call chart return shops. So it's a sample. So if Nate's record is being sold in Houston, by the way, Houston is in Brent, Big Up Housing, North Wheezy, and those people are not on the chart return samples. So you could sell 2 million records and not be in the chart. So sometimes you have to, I think my being here is to give you guys some context to what you see.
I think there was a real imprecision to the industry back then. You didn't know who your consumers were. You didn't know for sure how many copies you were selling. All you knew really was that if you got your songs on the radio and if you got physical copies in the shops, you might do all right, but you were never quite sure. Now there's this precision.
Absolutely.
You know who your fans are. You know how many streaming followers you've got. You know how many streams and YouTube plays and everything. You can see the data. And that accurate.
Is why now you see the profile of British black music. Where before I used to say, right, singles, they are for promotion. You don't really make money from it. And I wanted to see, my passion probably was to see people put food on their table through music rather than doing the plumbing or whatever else, the side hustle. So that, I think, was my passion. That's why I focused on the music industry and teaching music industry. Right. So where was I going with this? Yeah, but now, so yeah, at that time, my dream was to see British black music albums get to the top 10 or number one, but I couldn't dream of us. Soul to Soul was like one of. Soul to Soul, by the way, Club Classics, Volume 1, went to number one a couple of times. I do believe it was in the charts for a long time. But most of the British black artists were not selling albums. But now look at Sumsy, Skepta, all these guys are going in there, sometimes number 2, number 1, because the internet has really democratized, it's become more of a playing, what's it called? Playing field than before.
Yeah.
Level field than before.
I think in the past there was again there wasn't as much diversity within industry organisations, within A&R departments, within upper echelons of radio stations, record companies, publishers, all the rest of it. So they would say, who should we sign? Oh, here's this black dude who's a soul singer. Well, that's not unusual. Of course, black people sing soul music. Oh, here's this white guy that sings soul music. Now we can sell that. And so there was a trend in the the period you're talking about of blue-eyed soul, and they would be the people who'd be signed.
Absolutely.
And when we were taking Nate to a radio station, there were some radio stations who supported us really well, but they would say, "Oh no, we've got Craig David on the playlist. We don't need another one of them." Or we've got Lamar, or whoever it might be. Yeah. And so there was this kind of barrier to being played, to being heard. And Nate did very well overseas instead. But do you think it's become easier we talked about authenticity, you've talked about British black artists to be themselves more. Do you think there's also, those barriers have fallen away and there's a lot more opportunity for success and recognition across media and within the industry?
Yes, and it's in spite of the industry. Because before, a producer at radio can say what you're saying and not play. But now, in spite of them, when the charts returns are coming and your record is being, you can see it's selling, even though it's not played on radio. Now you have to do something because the boss is going to say, what's going on? So it's not because they wanted it to change, but the industry changed it. The industry changed it. I'll give you an example. Afrobeats, for example. Afrobeats was happening way, but underground. But now it's come
mainstream.
Mainstream. So whether they liked it or not, the numbers are there. Now we've moved to Africa where majors are signing artists directly from the continent of Africa because of numbers. I think numbers moves and changes things once you can establish that. But before it was all anecdotal and people very subjective, people's personal feeling that, I don't think we want to play that. But if you get the data and the data is saying that this is streaming or this is being downloaded, you have to respond to the market. Mm-hmm. So they've got no choice. They've been responding to the market.
And whether it was a major label act or something more independent, do you have a favourite British black music artist of all time?
I'm not quite sure I have a favourite, but I'll tell you something. As I was coming, I was thinking of Beverly Knight, and I always, when I write about her, I say, she's never made a record that I don't like. She's never made a record that I don't like. So I thought of Beverly Knight. Then I was thinking of Emily Sandy as well, because sometimes I sort of binge listen to stuff. So I'll listen, and again, fantastic stuff that she's done. And then Adele as well. So, yeah. And can I just say something? It's interesting about descriptions, which is subjective, because I think some years ago, sound is a BBC thing that highlights the new stars of the coming year. And I do believe that there was Duffy, Adele, and maybe one other European female, and they're described as soul artists. Mm-hmm. But now, when you look at Music Week and you look at the way that they show statistics of records, Adele is going to be pop. So R&B probably, or soul, has 3%, and pop has 70%, because some of the stuff that should be in black music in terms of R&B is seen, because particularly the European artists, as pop. So sometimes It's not very scientific.
What do you think? And I think I've voiced this controversial opinion before in your company, but do you think the British black community support their own enough that the danger is that when a British black artists cross over into the mainstream, are they still supported by their grassroots, their community? And do you think the pop acts, some of you've mentioned Beverly Knight, I mentioned Craig David, do you think they always have the support of their roots as they become more mainstream?
Traditionally, no. What happens is that when people cross over, people think, they're soft, and then, and I think black music tradition has been able to be regenerative. So new people will come, new styles will come, and whatever. But I think now it's changed. People are comfortable with success, and they've seen success. So if my man Stormzy sells 1 million or 2 million records, he's not seen as a sellout. But days gone by, that would happen. So some people will fall off. But I think people are gravitating towards success. The consumers are gravitating towards success. Social media shows us the lifestyle, and they buy into it. So it's not negative. And I'll give you an example in the pop industry. Before, a lot of rock musicians didn't want their music used in arts because, again, the credibility thing. But now, there's no one. Even the Beatles have had to succumb to it. But days gone by, it's a credibility thing. Or you know what they used to do? They will have it used in Japan, but not in the UK, not in America. But now, most people don't mind. I don't know about Neil Young, but most people don't mind. Yeah. So we've changed as consumers.
Yeah, I mean, I read the Bono from U2's biography, and he was saying that U2 turned down a huge advertising campaign because it's one of their most famous songs. They said that the power of its effect on an audience, they always feed off that, no matter what their mood was when they play their song. I think it's Where the Streets Have No Name. Then they know that something's good with the world, and then they got this incredible offer to use it in a car advert, and it was for something like, £40 million because it was so rare for them to give permission. And they decided that they might do it. They were discussing what they could do with that money. And then Jimmy Iovine actually said, you know how you describe, when you play that song, it's like God walks in the room, everything feels good in the world. If you do the advert, and obviously a lot of money on the table, he would have benefited from it too as a record label. He's like, when you play that song in the future, it'll be, they're playing the car advert song. And so they turned it down. They walked away from that kind of money.
But I think their music has been used in other arts, but probably that particular song. Yeah, sometimes songwriters think a song is like a child. So, so I can understand. It can't just be about money. It just can't be about money. When I used to do music business course, I used to say, your manager should know the journey you guys need to go on. So, for example, if Vegas was offering you $1 million, that's a lot of money. But your manager should know that that's not the right market or the right image for you. So you'd rather be doing that college circuit and getting your £1,000 rather than that $1 million. So things should be congruent.
So long before anyone gets offered £1 million sync deals, what would your advice be to someone just starting out in music, whether as an executive, a journalist, a musician? What would your advice be?
In what context?
Just starting out on their journey within the music industry. What's your best advice?
Okay, my best advice is to learn as much as you can and get some networks around you, because isolation is a bit difficult. Even if you're the chief executive and you don't have people around you. And let me tell you something. Even the chief executive, he's not totally in control. There's a board, and they can fire him. And I remember, I think, again, the 90s, I'll just mention the company, but not the name of the person, MCA. The managing director was big, doing blah, 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 and he was fired. So the fact that you're the chief executive still, except you own the company, and most of them do not own the company. So I say, have your networks. So even if you get fired, you can have some sympathy, or somebody can say, oh, there's an opening here. But if you're isolated, there could be an opening, but you haven't built your networks. So you can't fit in. Then after 6 months of being unemployed, what happens? Depression, mental health, and whatever. So networks are important.
Yeah. So everyone's accountable to someone, no matter how powerful.
Yes.
Who are you accountable to?
Okay, I'll say my wife.
Yeah.
No, seriously, because when I'm doing things and I'm isolated, particularly right now, she's not with me. She's abroad caring. I call her. So I'm really grateful that I am married. And obviously, if you're single, you didn't understand. But having been married, it's yeah. So I'm accountable to her.
Mm-hmm. Well, she must be a very supportive wife. You've
She
obviously
is. I'm blessed.
followed your passion to write about music, to campaign, to be an activist and an educator. It's great that you've dedicated your life, and I'm sure that MBE and knighthood will be coming down the track. Has anyone got any questions for our guest this evening? Anyone want to ask any questions about the history of Black British music, about Kwaku's career as a journalist or advocate or educator? Yeah, we've got some questions. So we've got a mic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About this cross sound with America in the reggae, can you describe a bit more about that? Because I'm really interested in actually, I think you're talking about the low end. Maybe I don't know if you were talking about more like in the mixing part or how the commercial sound is. I'm really interested about that.
Okay. There's no doubt that technically it took us a while to do the mixes to the American standard. But do you know what? When I look at what we call British soul, it became part of the style of the music. That if you went to a big studio and mix it like the Americans, they do something different. I'll give you an example. Lovers Rock, for example. Sometimes you have off-key and whatever, but it's become part of the aesthetics of it. So, obviously, we didn't have great studios, so we didn't have money to go to great studios. So, this was the beginning of home studios. So, people are doing things in their homes, and it wasn't the best, but I think it was the vibe. So, it became the aesthetics of British soul, which was different from the artists that were signed. Because when you're signed, you went into a proper studio, you had a good producer, because they were looking at Radio 1 to be on the same level as the Americans. But today, technology has equalized us. So there's no difference between something that's produced in London, something that's produced in the UK, including something that's produced in someone's bedroom. Technology that we used to spend thousands of pounds, people can get for like £100 today. It's just crazy. So in terms of sound, right now, I think we can do whatever is globally accepted. Hey, I'm now listening to a few things from Africa, particularly Nigeria, and this Afrobeats, man. Look at the production. Look at the production. So I think the cheapness of the equipment and the apps has meant that the standard is pretty level. But in the 90s, the Americans, in terms of quality, were here and we're here. But I wasn't saying that's a negative thing, because I took it to be the aesthetics of the British underground sound, or what we should call two-step soul.
So would you advocate, even though it's becoming easier to have a polished sound, that to stay true to your British music roots, you should try to avoid being too polished?
No, I think horses for courses. That's what I'm trying to say. Go with what feels good for you. Go with what feels good for you. Some guy does not want to go into, even if the company offers them to go to Abbey Road, they don't want it because they feel comfortable in their home studio. But if you think your sound needs to be in Abbey Road, go for it. Please, don't look at what somebody is doing. What is comfortable for you?
Sounds like good advice. That answer your question? Who else? There was hands over here, the hands at the front. We've got Mike coming down to you.
First and foremost, I just want to say thank you for your time and for sharing such insight. Sorry, I'm late. I was going to ask, as an artist who still considers myself upcoming, and I've been covered by British black music before, I love everything that you guys do. I was going to ask, what do you think is the current state of what normally is termed British on urban or underground music. So in regards to UK drill specifically, things like UK drill, UK rap, I know the last time I looked at this, people were saying that the new wave is Afro beats, and they think a lot of people that will be deemed rappers or grime artists are going to start trying to make Afrobeat songs. What do you think that space is like at the moment?
I think people move for two reasons. Either for the money or for creativity. So some people are going to say, oh, if Afrobeats is a swing, let me do Afrobeats. Again, I don't criticize people because you're not in people's shoes. You're not in people's shoes. But I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but let me tell you something. There was a time when most of us, and I did write for a magazine called Hip Hop. I'm not going to say I'm a great hip hop fan, but I did write for Hip Hop Connection. So I knew what was going on. And there was a time when we were not confident about our hip hop. There was a time when, but now, we used to buy American. When mobile started, the hip hop class, the criterion, just pure Americans, pure Americans. I'm heartened that British consumers now are comfortable to buy British. I'm being told that Americans don't have any space. Before, we used to go to American concerts, and you'd be lucky if they put a British on the bill. So one of the things that British Congress did was Brit on the bill. We're trying to have a campaign that when these guys come to take the money from here, at least have a Brit on the bill. But now the British people are running it. But before then, let me tell you, British talent was recognized elsewhere. In France, for example, there were a lot of artists in Britain you never heard of because you didn't know what they were doing in the UK. But they had a following in France or Japan as well. So sometimes, don't think because things are a bit slow here, it's all over the world. People have got pockets in the world where, in fact, in France, I heard that the British artists were the headliners, and the Americans sometimes were like the support. Yeah.
I think there's a trend that's been observed at the moment called glocalization, where local scenes are much healthier all around the world than they've ever been. British, acts are doing really well in Britain. But we're also in an international market now more than ever before, and the streaming platforms have this ability to blow something up into other territories. You're one of the most streamed acts in the UK. You've got a good chance of being well streamed across Europe. You become one of the most streamed artists in Europe. You've got a good chance of being in the global charts too. So that kind of outlook of how do I make my music travel? And I think the danger is local scenes can almost fold in on themselves, where it's so healthy that you don't then look the next rung up of how do I then become successful across the other territories.
Well, that's why you need managers, because I think artists, to a large extent, should focus on the creative side and have a manager. But let me tell you something. As the artist, the relationship, sometimes people think the manager is the big man, but actually it's the artist who's employing the manager. It's not the other way around. So you employ the manager, and so you have to sit together and say, where do you want to go? It's not where do I want to go, where do you want to go? So when the manager sees and understands, whilst you're doing the music, what Anthony is saying, the manager is plotting about how we can get into Germany or whatever. But I think more or less the artist should understand the business, but he can't do it all. So focus primarily on the creativity, but get a strong team behind you and who can share your vision. And I'll just add this. The fact that someone is a sibling or a family member does not mean that they see eye to eye with you. Because some people say, oh, my mother is managing me or whatever. I say, you have to know where you're going, because you may want to go to Birmingham, but your manager may want to go to Watford. So you've got to make sure that you know you're in sync as to where you're going.
Fair enough, yeah. Got time for another couple of questions, I think. We've got the mic here. Here we go.
You said that networking is the most important thing in the music industry. I was just wondering, as a student or somebody that's just joining the music industry, what would be the best way to start networking?
Okay, I didn't say it was the most important, but it is important. Just important, yes. So, you started. This is one. Putting yourself out. In the old days, I don't know if it still happens, there used to be things called open mics and songwriters things, and then people would go to those things. Put yourself out into what area you're into. I don't know, the most weirdest genre. Let's say King Kong. King Kong is a genre. There will be one or two people. So it's for you to search and go. And maybe it might be back or beyond. But there are people who are fanatical about this King Kong genre. So you have to research and then put yourself out into those places, both online and physical.
Thank you.
How did you get your first article or review published out of interest?
You know, I don't remember, but let me tell you something. I think there's a politics about internship and that people should be paid. I was not looking at money. I just wanted to write. So it did not occur to me. It did not worry me about the money. I understand the politics about that. So I wrote everywhere I could. So I don't actually, but I suspect it may have been a small magazine. There was something called Soul Trade, Soul Trader, and then I think they did reggae trade. So it was those small things. And as I said, it all started something called desktop publishing. So some people buy a small Mac and comes this software, I think it was called PageMaker, for example, and then they start printing magazines. So it may have been from one of those small magazines, because there's a whole lot of small magazines. One or two of them actually got stocked by HMV, not HMV, Tower Records. I know you guys are young, but there used to be a few Tower Records. One certainly was in Piccadilly, and you see some of these, what was it, Soul Underground, and one or two of those specialist magazines. So I think maybe Soul Trader or those type of magazines.
Yeah. So you just started writing and got out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got another question there. Have you got the mic? Coming to you.
Thank you. I appreciate both of you for this evening and everyone's attendance. Just had a question to you, Kwaku, in regards to technology and how you felt like it helped you, because you said that you got in the industry just as the internet was evolving. Was that something that you was intimidated by, or was that something that you felt like you definitely would have utilized it to your advantage?
No, I got into the industry before the internet came about. And let me just tell you, before, I used to write for a magazine called Billboard. And I hope you know a machine called fax. I'll fax the copy to the newspaper, and somebody will type it out. So there was times when people didn't have emails, you know? Right. So one of the ways to coax us to get emails was that they said they'll give us a higher you pay per word, right? So let's say if it was 20p per word, they was going to give like 25p per word to email. Because when they got the email, nobody had to type it. It was already done. So I'm telling you, hip hop connection, all these things. I put in the fax machine, it goes there, and somebody has to type it for it comes into. So yeah, that was where I was. So no, obviously I was using computers. So I was used to computers, and I was around when home computers started. Was the Commodore 64? I don't know if people there. That's how old I am. When you didn't have floppy disk, you had cassette. Your storage was a cassette, serial, not parallel. Yeah, so I've been into technology, so it was easier. So that means now you can send your stuff to so many organizations. So no, technology was great. It was great. Yeah.
I think you've obviously harnessed new technologies as they've come out. You know, you're probably on the vanguard of fax machines,
yes.
Vanguard of desktop publishing, and vanguard of the internet. It's funny because apparently the internet was around and existed before the fax machine, but the Japanese technology companies pushed the fax as a technology because the Japanese language is much more easily written, and so they pushed more visual communications technology rather than email.
Okay, can I just give you an anecdote? It's technology and money and people's interests. Because before, we used to have a couple of video formats. VHS, anybody remember VHS? But there was another one which was more superior to the VHS. But the industry ganged up and made sure that they pushed the VHS. So people push things for their self-interest.
Yeah, and what do you make of streaming? You comfortable with it? You still go back to your own cassettes, your vinyl, your CDs? How do you listen to music?
Thank you very much. You cannot stop the progress. You cannot stop the march of progress. You can. But I love cassettes. Not cassettes. I don't know the last time I played a cassette. No, no. I love CDs. I love physical. So let me tell you something. When I used to review and people used to send stuff to me, I love the physicality of it. Reading these days you don't have the paper to read the credits and all those kind of stuff. You don't know who wrote the song. So I love the physicality. Occasionally, I'm sorry, I'll go to Amazon and buy a physical stuff. I get bored with stuff downloaded and sent to me because it's jamming up my hard disk. So I'm not a fan of that. I know how convenient it is, but I might prefer the physical stuff. But having said that, the way I'm consuming music a lot is through not so much Spotify, but YouTube. I just punch in something YouTube and just listen, not necessarily watch, but just listen. You say something, for example, what was it? A song. Then if I want the lyrics, you punch the version, the lyrics version come down. Then I can watch the lyrics as I'm listening to it. So I think it's fantastic. But I don't like people send me stuff because I think it jumps my hard disk. So it doesn't make me a fan of the soft music.
Now that you've mentioned your appreciation of the physical formats and your attention to detail on the sleeve notes, I now remember that when Nate James' album came out, you emailed me after reading the sleeve notes. What do you mean by this? And you'd read it all, and you were intrigued by the detail or the insight into the artist's, music making that the sleeve notes gave you. So yeah, you definitely were paying attention.
Oh yeah. I loved to. And before I even started reviewing and writing, those days would be vinyl, so 12-inch albums and stuff. You come home, you open, you put it on there, and often it would be what's called gatefold. You open and there'll be the lyrics, and you listen, you read the lyrics. Elton John. I used to buy Elton John albums because they always had the lyrics. And then you're looking at the credits. These days, even CDs was hard. These days, I wear glasses and still a struggle to read the credits on CDs. I don't know why they don't make it easy and just put it on the soft. Once you download, I have seen lyrics with some downloads, but it's not very common. So people are losing the appreciation of those behind the scenes, like the producer or even the songwriter. All they know is the artist. People think the artist wrote the song. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
I think the streaming platforms are getting much better at that. You can search by producer, by songwriter, the lyrics.
Yeah, I noticed on Spotify there's something information. When you tap it on, sometimes you get the credits. But half the time it's empty. People don't bother. Yeah. They just look at the artist and the track. That's all. And I'm worried about what's in the metadata, particularly for songwriters. I think songwriters and publishers are shafted, man. The artists, actually, the record companies that are sorted. The record companies are sorted. And you guys, I think you need to be the next guys to try and change things. Because the record companies get their monies, but the artists do not necessarily get their monies. And the songwriters and the publishers are down. And sadly, the major publishers are owned by the record companies, and they look at the record company interest as opposed to the publishing interest.
Hallelujah. Yeah. I mean, Kwaku, I think you're the only person I've heard recently with that exact same message, which has been something I've been, banging the drum for a long time. We're never going to see significant change in the distribution of money within streaming, whilst artists, and it's generally artists, are signing with the same damn big international corporations for their publishing as they are for their records, because the split, 80% of the money in publishing goes to the songwriters, roughly, whereas the opposite, 80% goes to the record companies for the records. So for as long as that's the case, the record companies, the big corporates who own the record companies, they want more money coming in on the recording side than the publishing side.
Indeed. I remember I did go to the copyright tribunal many years ago, and I was shocked at how the record companies, because the publishers wanted an increase in the royalty rate, the statutory royal rate. And the record companies were decrying the publishers. They said they don't do anything. They write on our coattails. But some publishers do serious stuff. And actually, some record companies sign artists after the publishers have introduced them and done some work. So I started as a publisher anyway. Publishers have their role in there. And last thing I'll tell you guys, the record companies win each way. They win from the streaming, but do you know that they've got equity in all those platforms? In Spotify, all those platforms, so they get paid from the streaming and also the profits that those platforms make. They don't share those with the artists. And you guys have got to I've got to shift the paradigm. I'll tell you something, you too, right? They perform just their own songs. So they were saying to you, PRS, why do we have to give out the money to you before it comes to you? Nevertheless, it's a long time, but so and I like to be exact, but the basic thing was that U2 kicked. So PRS had to change the way of live collections if you're writing your own songs. So I think you guys, you're learning, you may become big at some time. Please try and change the system, because the system does not favor the creatives at all.
Well, these guys, hopefully the audience are the future of the music industry. Hopefully you guys feel that you have the ability to enact change by aiming for better. And it's through the knowledge of people like Kwaku giving his time to pass on your wisdom and your love and passion for British black music that is empowering that next generation. So I've got one final question, and then we're going to open up the stage to the open mic. You've just said Black History Month. You're always busy doing these talks. What's next for you? What should we be looking out for?
Yeah, actually, you're asking me earlier, what have I been doing? I said, I've been doing much of music. I've been doing, I tend to say African history rather than black history. So I do it all year round. But I said I've opened next year, 2024, to do nothing, because I want to make time. Last year, I said, I'm not going to do anything for 2023. Indeed, 2022, and I ended up doing so many events, particularly with Zoom and what. No. So my focus is on African history, but more British history, because we tend to know about what happened in America, what happened in Jamaica, but not what happens in the UK. So I'm looking to do something on the Windrush, and not the same old, because a lot of the stuff that we hear about Windrush historically is not correct. So that will be one focus that I'll be looking at doing. And then there's another person who has been misquoted. There's a plaque in the public domain that I don't think is historically correct. So I've got to come correct with the references and what not to challenge what's out there. So it's writing for next year.
So you're going to write a couple of books?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, let's wish him well, and let's thank him very much for his time. Please give a round of applause. Thank you, Kwaku.